The bank's lights flickered like fireflies trapped in time. He stood in the same line for the third time this month, always with the same brown envelope holding fragments of a life he no longer lived. This time, it was the rare books he'd collected for decades, first editions worth more than their weight in gold, yet worth less to him than the piece he was chasing. The teller, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, recognized him at once. Her smile mixed curiosity with concern. "Another sale, Mr. Almeida?" He only nodded, avoiding her gaze. How could he explain that he was trading objects for pieces of his own soul? While he waited, his fingers traced circles on the counter's cold surface. Fingers that had held so many hands in moments of despair, that had opened so many doors sealed by fate. 247 times those hands had meant the difference between life and loss. But the number that mattered was one, the single time those same hands had failed beyond repair. The money he received smelled of dust and detachment. He counted the bills on autopilot, each one representing hours of training, new gear, fuel to keep his peculiar mission alive. Since losing everything that truly mattered, he discovered a hard truth: saving strangers was the only way to bear the emptiness where love used to live. His phone vibrated, cutting through the bank's heavy silence. The message was short and sharp: "Fire downtown. Old building. Families trapped." For a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, his hands stopped shaking. The familiarity of urgency swept away the fog of fatigue that dogged him. He had purpose again, a reason to exist beyond the pain. Reality quickly reasserted itself with its usual cruelty. His volunteers were tied up, with jobs, commitments, lives that didn't orbit other people's emergencies. His equipment was aging, the money from each sale never enough to keep it current. In the warehouse they used as a base needed repairs he couldn't afford. He ran for the door, the envelope clutched to his chest like an amulet against his own shadows. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken, heavy clouds announcing an oncoming storm. As always, the weather seemed to mirror the turmoil inside him, calm before the tempest, hope wrestling with despair. The old pickup growled to life, protesting another mission. The radio whispered updates: the fire spreading fast, professional firefighters en route, the building old and structurally fragile. Each detail reminded him of the danger ahead, but also of the chance to make a difference one more time. On the way, his eyes found the rearview mirror and, for a moment, he didn't recognize the man staring back. Gray hair that didn't match his age, deep circles carved by sleepless nights, lines mapping every life saved and every painful memory. Where was the confident man who once believed in the world's goodness? Replaced by this relentless seeker of redemption. Traffic locked up, an accident blocked the main avenue. His hands tightened on the wheel with a frustration years in the making. Always the same: obstacles, delays, roadblocks. As if the universe insisted on testing his resolve, daring his conviction that the fight was still worth it. He stepped out, heart racing not at the nearness of danger, but at the sudden helplessness. He looked ahead and saw the dark smoke rising, staining the horizon with urgency. Each plume seemed to carry the silent pleas of those who depended on the courage of strangers, the same pleas that echoed through his dreams every night. Back in the truck, his fingers found the small wooden cross hanging from the mirror. She had placed it there when they still believed faith could shield them from tragedy. How disappointed she would be to know his faith now lived not in the divine, but in the human grit to keep trying even when everything seemed lost. Traffic began to move again, slowly, as though reluctant to let him meet his fate. He accelerated, ignoring potholes, honking cars, a world spinning on as if nothing were wrong. For him, everything had been wrong since that night. Everything was a reminder of what he'd lost and would never regain. As he neared the scene, the smell of smoke intensified, carrying him to places he'd rather forget. The same acrid bite, the same suffocating heat, the same taste of urgency in his mouth. Some sensations don't live only in memory, they inhabit every fiber, each breath, every heartbeat. He parked a few blocks away, his pulse quickening not from fear of what he might find, but from the haunting familiarity of the scene. Professionals were already working, hoses arcing water into flames that danced with destructive intent. People wept on the sidewalks, clinging to one another, their faces stamped with the terror he knew too well. And then he saw it, on the third floor, a window with white curtains fluttering in smoke. A small figure, a child perhaps, pounding the glass with desperate hands. His stomach clenched. Always children. Always the most vulnerable, the ones who least deserved the whims of a cruel accident. His feet moved before his mind finished choosing. Gear on his back, mask on his face, he pushed toward the burning building as firefighters shouted warnings he didn't hear. There was only one mission, one purpose, one reason to keep breathing when everything inside him begged to quit. And as the first tongues of fire licked his boots, a simple truth echoed through him. He wasn't here to be a hero. He was here because this was the only place his pain made sense, the only moment when the emptiness found purpose, the only circumstance where being imperfect wasn't a weakness, but an understanding. The warehouse welcomed him with its usual silence, a silence louder than any scream. The concrete walls had witnessed not only his efforts but his slow change from broken man to wounded healer. Here, among stacked equipment and hazard maps, he found what the world outside withheld: purpose. Weak light filtered through grimy windows, illuminating dust motes that moved like particles of hope suspended in the air. Every object in the place told part of his story: the flight suit hung with meticulous care, the mud-caked boots that had tread so many tragedies, the radio that whispered disaster reports like invitations to another chance at redemption. He walked to the far wall where 247 chalk marks stood as a quiet testimony to his obsessive search for meaning. His fingers touched the last mark, still fresh, as if he could feel the echo of the rescue just completed. Each stroke represented not only a life saved but a piece of his own soul recovered from the ashes of regret. At the center of the wall, set slightly apart, a small photograph in a plain frame kept alive the memory that fueled his mission. Her smile seemed to light the darkest corner, reminding him that love, even lost, keeps guiding our steps long after voices fall silent. The volunteers began to arrive. First Marco, the ex-con whose strong hands hit a softer heart than anyone would guess. Then Anna, the single mother whose resilience inspired even the skeptics. One by one they formed not just a team, but an improvised family of damaged souls learning to mend one another. That night's training focused on confined space rescues. He demonstrated techniques with a patience that contrasted with the urgency always burning in him. "The danger isn't just the fire," he said, tightening a harness. "It's the panic that makes us forget every second counts." His eyes met each volunteer's, passing on not only knowledge, but the calm needed to face chaos. While the others practiced, he retreated to his corner, a simple desk with city maps, reports from past fires, and a coffee cup that was never empty. Here, far from curious eyes, he could be just a man trying to find meaning where none seemed to exist. Every alternate route traced on a map, every report analyzed line by line, was an attempt to control the uncontrollable. Anna approached with 2 cups of tea. "For the boss," she said with a shy smile. He accepted, grateful for a gesture that carried real care. "You look tired today," she observed, seeing through what he tried to hide. He only nodded, dodging the conversation he knew was inevitable. "Sometimes I wonder," she continued, looking at the marks on the wall, "what makes someone do so much for people they don't even know?" The question hung in the air like the smoke that always surrounded them. He looked at the photograph, then his hands, and finally into Anna's curious eyes. "Maybe it's precisely because we don't know them," he said, enigmatic. The truth was more tangled than any answer he could give. Each life saved was a fragment of the one he'd lost, each family reunited an echo of the one that had broken, every grateful smile a reminder of the one he'd never see again. But how to explain that without exposing wounds that still bled? The radio crackled, another fire, this time in an abandoned factory. Less urgent, fewer lives at risk, but still an opportunity. He looked at his volunteers, the determination in their faces, the trust they placed in him. How could he let them down? How could he say no when so many said yes to the shared madness? As they readied to leave, Marco came over. "Boss, I need a word." His tone was unusually serious. "My sister, she's sick. I need to step away for a while." The words dropped like stones into the warehouse quiet. Another loss, another departure, another reminder that nothing lasts. He set a hand on Marco's shoulder. "Do what you have to do. We'll be here when you get back." The promise sounded hollow even to him. How many times had he said that to people he never saw again? How many promises made in the hope this time would be different? Loading gear into the truck, he glanced up at the night sky. In the city, the stars seemed farther away, as if unwilling to witness human pain. He remembered nights he'd looked at those same stars with hope, with plans, with the naive certainty that the future would be bright. Now, the stars were silent witnesses to his relentless search for a forgiveness that might never come. Each night beneath that same sky reminded him that time moves on, indifferent to his pain, his victories, his losses. The universe is vast and impersonal, and in it he was just a man trying to make a difference in a forgotten corner. On the drive, the radio murmured soft music, a strange counterpoint to the tension in the air. Anna hummed along from the back seat, her gentle voice carving a moment of normal in the middle of chaos. Marco drove with steady hands, eyes fixed on the road as if he could see beyond the reach of the headlights. He looked back toward the warehouse fading into darkness. It was more than a base, it was a sanctuary where his failures turned to strength, where painful memories became fuel for compassion. What would it be like to return without Marco? How would it feel to go on without one more piece of his improvised family? As they approached, the red lights of the professionals painted urgency across the scene. This time it was smaller, manageable, almost routine. But every fire, however small, carries the seed of tragedy. Any flame can become an inferno, any spark can ignite catastrophe. As they stepped out, he paused, looking at his volunteers. They trusted him, believed in his leadership, followed him through literal and metaphorical darkness. In him? Who did he trust? What did he believe? The answer arrived as it always did, in the next life to be saved, the next family to be reunited, the next chance to prove the fight was worth it. The smoke filled his lungs, familiar and unsettling. Flames danced in the factory windows, lighting the night with destructive glow. And once again, he braced to face the outer fire while battling the flames that always burned within. The abandoned factory breathed smoke like an ancient dragon roused from sleep. Red brick walls, once symbols of industrial progress, now bore witness only to decay. To him, though, every burning building was a cathedral for action prayer, where his faith in humanity was tested and reaffirmed with each rescue. Marco led the initial approach, hands steady on the axe with a precision that belied his past. Anna followed close, eyes sharp for any sign of life. They had become extensions of his will, instruments through which his quest for redemption took practical shape. Inside, the heat was oppressive. Smoke curled in hypnotic spirals, drawing patterns that reminded him of dreams he'd once had, dreams of a normal life, quiet mornings, nights without emergencies. But those belonged to another man, a time when he still believed happiness was a right, not a prize earned through sacrifice. Left. Marco's voice rang through the main hall. I heard something. Hope in that simple phrase pushed his feet faster. Every sound, every motion, every breath could mark the difference between success and failure, between life and the loss he knew too well. They found an elderly man hunched behind a rusted machine. His eyes held a terror that needed no words, a primal fear that spoke directly to the soul. He knelt, taking the man's hands in a practiced gesture of comfort. We're getting you out, he said with a calm he did not feel. While Marco and Anna helped the man to safety, he lingered a moment, scanning for others. The factory seemed to whisper its secrets through the flames, stories of workers who once filled these halls with life and purpose. Now, only ghosts and memories drifted in the shadows. Outside, the air brought a snap of clarity. The old man, safe now, looked at him with gratitude so raw it hurt. Thank you, he breathed, hands still shaking. I thought it was the end. The words echoed in his mind, recalling how many times he himself had thought the same, and how many times he kept going anyway. On the drive back, silence felt different. Marco was distant, thoughts clearly with his ailing sister. Anna watched the city slide by, her face catching streetlight in a kaleidoscope of unspoken feelings. And him? He drove with steady hands while his mind wandered through terrain more dangerous than any fire. Back at the warehouse, the routine of cleaning and sorting gear offered familiar comfort. Every piece had its place, every tool its function. Here, at least, there was order in the chaos, purpose in the universe's apparent randomness. As Marco washed hoses and Anna organized first aid kits, he allowed himself a moment of quiet. His desk waited, the maps, the reports, the empty cup. He sat, eyes drifting to the photo on the wall. Her smile seemed different tonight, sadder, farther away, as if time were erasing not just the image, but the essence of the memory it held. Anna set a fresh cup of tea down. Thinking about her again? The question was soft, almost a whisper. He nodded, avoiding her eyes. You know, she said, my grandmother always told me the people we love never really leave us. They just learn to love us from a different place. The simplicity of the wisdom touched something in him. Maybe she was right. Maybe his mission wasn't about forgetting but honoring. Maybe every life saved was a way to continue the love he couldn't protect. Marco stepped in, face grave. I have to go, boss. My sister, she's worse. The words fell like stones. He nodded, understanding more than words could show. Go. Do what you need to do. We'll be here when you're back. The promise felt truer this time, as if departures had finally taught him something. After Marco left, the warehouse seemed larger, emptier. Anna looked at him with an understanding beyond language. "It's going to be okay," she said, not as a question, but a fact. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that okay existed. But experience had taught him okay is a relative state, a pause between storms. That night, as he organized the latest report, something shifted inside. Perhaps it was Marco's leaving, or Anna's words, or the fatigue of years fighting real and metaphorical fires. For the first time in a long while, he allowed the thought that his mission might not be eternal, that one day he might rest. But not today. Today there were more lines to add, more lives to touch, more hope to spread in a world determined to snuff it out. When he reached for the chalk to draw the next line, his hands did not shake. For the first time in years, certainty steadied his movements, a conviction born not of despair, but of growing acceptance. The new mark, the 248th, glowed under the warehouse's weak light. Each stroke was a story, each story a life, each life proof that even in the dark, light can be found. And him? He was only the keeper of those lights, the custodian of those hopes, the architect of everyday miracles. As he settled in for another solitary night, the radio stayed silent. No fire, no emergency, no call to action. The stillness felt strange, almost uneasy. He was used to urgency. Calm seemed like a luxury he didn't know how to enjoy. Sitting at his desk, facing 248 marks, he understood something essential. His journey wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future where others wouldn't have to carry the same weight. Not about forgetting, but remembering differently, not with pain, but with purpose. The phone rang, breaking the quiet. Marco, voice tight with emotion. "She's better, boss. The doctors say she'll recover." Relief in that simple sentence lit a lantern inside him. Sometimes the best news doesn't come from spectacular rescues, but from silent recoveries. Hanging up, he looked at the photograph. For the first time in years, her smile didn't hurt. For the first time, he could smile back. The past was still there, the memories still stung, the questions still echoed. But maybe, just maybe, he was learning to live with them instead of despite them. Night moved on, stars shone outside, the city slept. And in the quiet warehouse, a man who once lost everything discovered he might have found something even more precious, not the redemption he sought, but the peace he never knew he needed. Morning arrived with soft light filtering through the dirty windows, illuminating the 248 marks like constellations of hope. He woke still seated at his desk, last night's coffee cold and bitter. His bones ached beyond simple fatigue, the cumulative pain of so many nights like this, so many battles against fire and himself. Marco arrived earlier than usual, face lit by relief that softened his normally hard features. "She's okay, boss. Really okay." Simple words carrying the weight of sleepless nights and unspoken fears. He smiled, an honest expression that felt strange on a worry-lined face. "I'm happy for you," he said, knowing happiness was a feeling he barely recognized anymore. Anna came soon after with fresh bread and community news. "People are talking about us," she said, pouring coffee. "They say we're guardian angels of the forgotten." The idea made him uncomfortable. Angels don't carry this much guilt, don't have so many questions. Don't wake each morning wondering if it's still worth it. That morning's training focused on advanced first aid. While Anna demonstrated resuscitation techniques, he watched his volunteers, Marco with contained strength, Anna with resilient kindness, the others with their own stories of survival. Together they formed a mosaic of broken and mended humanity, each piece essential to the whole. At noon, as they checked the gear, the radio sounded. Not a fire this time, but a partial building collapse downtown. People trapped under debris, critical situation. The urgency in the operator's voice was different, heavier, more immediate. On the way, tension filled the truck. Collapses were different from fires, more unpredictable, more treacherous, quieter in their destruction. Marco drove with fierce focus, eyes on the road as if he could see through the obstacles. Anna prepped medical kits with precise movements, every gesture tuned to efficiency. At the scene, controlled chaos. Professional crews already working, yellow suits bright against the gray dust coating everything. The building, once imposing, looked like a wounded giant, its insides exposed. He slipped into the effort, his high-risk experience quickly evident. While others focused on accessible areas, he heard it, a faint cry from deeper in the rubble. Without hesitating, he began to dig, hands ignoring cuts and scrapes. Marco and Anna joined him, forming a human chain of resolve. Stone by stone, brick by brick, they carved a path toward the sound. Dust streaked their faces, mixing with sweat and determination. Every moment mattered, every breath was a fight against time and gravity. They found her at last, a girl no older than 8, pinned beneath a beam that had miraculously formed a shelter over her. Her eyes held a terror no child should know. "My mom," she whispered, clutching a dust-stained teddy bear. He worked with a calm that belied the urgency. While Marco and Anna stabilized the beam, he talked to the girl, his voice a harbor in the storm. "What's your bear's name?" A simple question made a bubble of normal in the chaos. "Beto," she breathed, meeting his eyes with a trust so pure it hurt. The rescue took hours that felt like seconds. When they finally brought her into the light, the sun seemed to burn brighter. Her mother, freed minutes earlier, ran to her, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust. Their embrace was more than gratitude, it was hope made flesh. Back at the warehouse, wiping ash from their gear, something shifted in the air. Marco looked at him with renewed respect, Anna with admiration that transcended rank. And him? He felt something absent for years, not pride, but a brief peace, a truce in his constant inner war. That night, as he added the 249th mark, his hands were steady. The chalk slid smooth across the wall, another line in the testimony of his journey. Each mark was different now, not just numbers, but faces, stories, lives continuing because he and his team chose to say yes when many would say no. At his desk, reviewing the day's reports, he realized he was looking at the photo differently. Her smile was no longer a silent accusation, but a reminder of what love can inspire. Maybe she wasn't disappointed in his mission. Maybe she was proud of the man he'd become, not in spite of pain, but because of it. Anna set down 2 cups of tea, serenity glowing in her face. Today felt different, didn't it? She didn't need to explain. He knew exactly what she meant. The rescue of the girl and her bear touched something elemental in all of them, a reminder that behind every emergency are real people, real dreams, real loves. Marco joined, his usual stoicism giving way to rare vulnerability. My sister. She asked me today why I do this. The question hung, waiting for an answer he might not have. What did you tell her? Anna asked softly. I told her it's because one day someone might need me to do for them what you did for me. The words echoed through the quiet, creating a moment of shared understanding. They weren't just there to save others, they were there to save each other, to remind one another that even in deep darkness, light can be found when people choose to carry torches together. Later, when the place was quiet again, he looked at the 249 marks. They were no longer souvenirs of rescues, they were witnesses of transformation. Each line represented not only a life saved, but a fragment of his own soul learning to trust again, hope again, love again. The phone rang, breaking the calm. Not an emergency, a woman whose husband they'd rescued weeks earlier. I just wanted to say thank you again, she said, voice full of feeling. He's fine. He went back to work today. The simplicity of it filled the usual emptiness. Hanging up, he looked at the photograph. For the first time in years, he felt he might be honoring her memory the right way, not through endless mourning, but through service that turned pain into purpose, loss into legacy, sorrow into hope. Night deepened, stars shimmered, the city continued its eternal dance. And in the quiet warehouse, a man who once thought he'd lost everything discovered he was finding more than he'd ever imagined. Autumn arrived, warm colors and cold winds bringing a subtle change to the warehouse air. The 249 marks seemed to witness not just rescues, but passing seasons, completed cycles, gradual transformations. He noticed the changes not only outside, but within, an acceptance born not of resignation, but of understanding. His health began to show the cost of years of sacrifice. A persistent tremor in his left hand that once appeared only under intense stress now lingered. Back pain that used to fade after a night's sleep settled in as a permanent resident. His once reliable body started whispering warnings he preferred to ignore. Anna noticed first. You're different, she said one morning while they checked gear. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. More tired. He tried a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's age, Anna. Comes for everyone. But he knew it was more, the accumulated toll of carrying not only his own weight, but so many others. Marco saw it too. During a particularly intense drill, he stopped mid-demonstration, breathing harder than usual. Boss, maybe we should slow down, Marco suggested, voice heavy with genuine concern. Slowing down felt strange. How do you slow when so many still need you? The radio kept calling. Fires, accidents, emergencies of every kind. Each alert an invitation to another battle, another chance to matter, another test for his worn body and spirit. And he kept answering, not for heroics, but because it was the only language he still fully understood. One especially hard afternoon, returning from a warehouse blaze, something gave. His knees buckled as he stepped down from the truck. Marco and Anna rushed to him, their faces etched with a worry he'd never seen before. It's just fatigue, he insisted, trying to stand with a dignity his body refused. They helped him inside, his arm over Marco's shoulders more from need than ceremony. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to accept help, to admit he might not be invincible. It felt strangely freeing, as if a burden he'd carried alone for too long had finally been shared. That night, alone after everyone left, he looked at his hands. The same hands that had held so many lives, opened so many doors, quieted so many fears. Now they trembled lightly even at rest, reminding him that time is an uncompromising master who charges everyone the same price. His mind drifted to a different past, different nights. Nights when these hands held others for love, not duty. Nights when exhaustion came from shared laughter, not answered alarms. The contrast cut so deep that for a moment the ache of longing was almost physical, a sharp pain in the chest breath couldn't ease. The phone rang, breaking the nostalgia. A doctor, one of the many who knew his work. "We need to talk, Almeida. Your tests." The voice was grave, professionally serious, leaving no room for argument. He booked the appointment, reluctant not from fear, but from knowing some truths are easier ignored than faced. In the days that followed, something shifted within the team. Marco took on more responsibility, Anna grew more protective. The other volunteers seemed to grasp without words that a quiet transition was underway. And him? He watched, proud and a little sad, as his legacy took shape in hands he'd trained. Training became less about new techniques and more about distilled wisdom. He shared stories not only of success but of failure, the times everything went wrong, the lessons salvaged from error, the truths discovered in the ashes of broken hopes. Each story a gift, each lesson a legacy. On a clear morning, as he taught Anna the subtle signs of structural collapse, she looked at him with understanding beyond words. "You're preparing us to go on without you, aren't you?" The direct question deserved an honest answer. "I'm preparing you to go on whether I'm here or not." The truth of it hung between them, a moment of deep connection. They weren't just teacher and students, leader and followers. They were companions on a shared journey, guardians of a flame that had to keep burning no matter what. The appointment came sooner than he wished. Antiseptic air, inconvenient truths. The tests confirmed what his body had been whispering for months. Years of extreme physical strain, poor sleep, constant stress had exacted their price. Nothing fatal, nothing immediate. Just accelerated wear from a life of sacrifice. On the way back, he stopped at a park he hadn't visited in years. Children played, couples walked hand in hand, life followed its ordinary, predictable course. For a moment, he wondered what it would be like to have chosen differently, a safer, easier existence. But deep down he knew he never could have. Back at the warehouse, he found Marco and Anna waiting, faces mixed with concern and hope. "Well?" Marco asked, voice gentler than usual. "I need to slow down," he said, the words coming easier than expected. "But not stop. Never stop." The relief on their faces was moving. They didn't want him to quit, they wanted him to continue, but in a way that let him continue longer. Understanding was a gift he hadn't known he needed. That night, as he added the 250th mark, something fundamental shifted. The act was no longer about compensation or redemption, it was about celebration. Celebration of lives saved, of hope renewed, of a purpose found in the most unlikely circumstances. At his desk, looking at her photo, he realized perhaps she'd always known he would find his way. Maybe their love was big enough to outlast loss, strong enough to inspire not just grief, but transformation. The radio stayed quiet, granting a rare truce. The silence no longer felt empty or threatening. It was a space for reflection, for gratitude, for acceptance. Acceptance of his limits, gratitude for his victories, reflection on the road behind. Preparing for another night, his eyes returned to the 250 marks. No longer just numbers, They were chapters in a story larger than him, proof that even a broken life can be rebuilt into something beautiful if you dare to try. Night advanced, stars shone with renewed intensity, the city slept in peace. And in the quiet warehouse, a man who once thought he'd lost everything discovered he was only beginning to understand what it means to find. Winter arrived with not only cold, but a different quiet in the warehouse. The 250 marks seemed to glow under the dim light, each one telling a story of endurance, not just against fire, but against the inner erosion of long missions. He felt that erosion not as defeat, but as necessary transformation. His days took on a new rhythm. Less direct action, more guidance. Fewer races against the clock, more patient teaching. Marco had become his right hand not just in operations but in leadership. Anna brought a sensitivity that perfectly complemented Marco's practical strength. Together they formed a triad that kept the flame alive while he learned the art of letting go. The tremor came less often now, but was more noticeable when it did. Newer volunteers watched with curious concern, veterans with a respect that understood the cost of each life saved. He no longer tried to hide it. There was dignity in accepting the marks a life of service leaves behind. On a bitter December afternoon, while reviewing cold weather protocols, something extraordinary happened. An elderly couple arrived, cheeks pink from the cold, hands entwined with tenderness that spoke of decades. "We're looking for Mr. Almeida," they said, voices shaking with emotion rather than weather. They were the grandparents of the teddy bear girl, the 249th mark. They brought not only thanks, but the part of the story he'd never known. The girl, Sophia, had been diagnosed with a rare heart condition months before the collapse. Doctors said she might not survive significant trauma. "You didn't just save our granddaughter," the grandfather said, gripping his hands with surprising strength. "You saved our whole family." The grandmother added, "She says you're her guardian angel." That Beto, the bear, tells her every night about the brave man who brought them back to the light. The words fell like seeds into fertile ground. For the first time, he fully grasped the ripple effect of each rescue. Not just lives saved, but futures preserved, stories that would go on, love that would continue to be shared. The healing he saw for himself was happening through the lives he touched, even if he never saw the whole arc. That night, after they left, he stayed alone as usual. But the silence had changed. It was no longer a man alone with ghosts, but someone making peace with them. When he reached for the chalk, his hand was steady. His fatigue felt less like a burden and more like proof of the road he'd traveled. Marco and Anna noticed. "You seem lighter," Anna said the next morning. He smiled, a gesture that came easier now. "I'm learning that carrying others' weight doesn't mean carrying it alone." The emergencies continued, as they always would. Winter fires were especially treacherous. People sought warmth in dangerous ways, structures strained under temperature swings. But now he met each call without desperate urgency, with a calmer resolve born of knowing his place in the larger pattern. In a particularly complex operation, a nursing home fire during a snowstorm, he took on the role of coordinator for the first time. Watching Marco lead with competence that swelled his chest with pride, he understood his legacy wasn't in the marks on the wall, but in the skills he'd passed on, the confidence he'd inspired, the compassion he'd modeled. The operation succeeded, every resident evacuated, no serious injuries. As Marco received thanks from relieved families, he stood back, observing. Anna stepped up beside him. "You taught well," she said. It was all he needed to hear. back at the warehouse, celebrating another success, something fundamental shifted. The newer volunteers now looked to Marco with the same respect they once reserved only for him. The transition he'd feared was unfolding not as replacement but as natural evolution. He was there to witness it, to bless it, to celebrate it. That night, reviewing the report, his eyes found the photo. Her smile looked different, not of longing, but approval. As if she had always known he'd not only find a way to continue, but to bloom in the hardest soil. Winter also brought quiet pockets between alarms. Times when the warehouse became not just a base but a community space. Volunteers shared food, stories, support. He, who had always seen himself as a solitary beacon, discovered he was part of a constellation that shone brighter together. On one of those calm nights, over a simple meal, Marco asked what everyone was thinking. "Boss, what would you do differently if you could go back?" The question deserved honesty. "Nothing," he said after a beat. "Because every choice, every mistake, every success brought me here. And here is exactly where I need to be." The answer drew a reverent quiet. Each person present understood, in their own way, the depth of that acceptance. It wasn't about having no regrets, it was about recognizing that regrets are part of what makes us who we are. When spring began to show, melting snow and waking trees, he felt a renewal of his own. The fatigue that once felt like a burden became a familiar companion, a reminder that he was alive, that he felt, that he mattered. The 251 marks shone in the earlier morning light. Each one not only a saved life, but a lesson learned, a wound healed, a step toward understanding that healing doesn't come from the absence of pain, but from turning it into meaning. As he prepared for the day, he caught his reflection in the window, a man with gray hair, eyes that had seen so much, hands that had done so much. And for the first time in a very, very long time, he felt no urge to be someone else, somewhere else, living some other life. Healing, he discovered, wasn't about forgetting the past, but embracing the present with the full richness of what brought him here. In that embrace, he found not the redemption he had chased, but something infinitely more precious, the peace of knowing that, in the end, he'd done the best he could with what he had, where he was. Spring blossomed, bringing not only flowers but a different awakening in him. The 251 marks seemed to breathe with the renewed light through newly cleaned windows. Marco had taken operational command with an ease that testified both to his growth and to the success of the transition. Anna brought an administrative grace that complemented Marco's practical skill. He now occupied a different place in the ecosystem he had built, less operational, more advisory. Less about doing, more about being. His days filled not with the rush of rescues but the depth of teaching, not with the adrenaline of danger but with the satisfaction of watching others thrive where he had planted seeds. The tremor had become almost imperceptible, appearing only under intense focus or on cold nights. He no longer hid it, there was acceptance, not resignation. Some marks are badges of honor, not flaws to conceal. On a particularly hot May afternoon, while teaching new volunteers the principles of fire dynamics, the radio sounded with an urgency everyone recognized instantly. Not the usual tone, deeper, more immediate, carrying a seriousness that made even the veterans freeze. Fire in a downtown apartment complex. Multiple victims trapped. Compromised structure. Critical. The words fell like stones into the sudden quiet. Marco was already moving, mind-mapping logistics, resources, approach. Anna coordinated gear prep with a smooth efficiency forged by years. He watched a beat, heart quickening with a familiarity that felt almost comforting. Then, without thinking, he began to gear up. Not as leader, not as teacher, but as what he was at his core, a man who answers when others cry for help. "What are you thinking, boss?" Marco asked, worry flickering in his eyes. "I'm thinking some lessons can only be taught on the battlefield," he said, adjusting gear with motions his body remembered even when his mind hesitated. On the way, the truck's silence shifted from tension to deep focus. Marco drove with a honed determination. Anna mentally ran through procedures. Newer volunteers watched with a mix of fear and excitement he recognized from his own first days. At the scene, organized chaos. Professionals already at work, red lights painting urgency. The mid-rise building belched dense smoke from upper floors. People shouted from balconies, others waved desperately through closed windows. He folded into the effort, not as commander but as resource. Years of high-risk experience became instantly useful, small details others might miss, nuances in fire behavior only time can teach. He worked alongside Marco, not ahead of him, guiding with suggestions rather than orders. Progress was hard. Fire had raced through ventilation shafts, igniting multiple fronts. The building, older than expected, posed extra risks with every step. Then the call, family trapped in apartment 308, top floor engulfed. The mother on the phone, voice a thread stretched thin. Two small children, the father trying to hold a barrier against the smoke. Critical, and the clock running out. Marco looked at him, a question unspoken. The answer came in action. Together, like old times, they set the plan. Anna would coordinate outside support, others would form an evacuation chain. The two of them would go in. Inside, the heat was nearly unbearable. Visibility dropped to a few meters, every breath battled suffocation. But in the chaos there was a strange calm, the calm of being exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what you must. They found 308, its handle warped shut by heat. With practiced coordination, they forced entry. Inside, contained panic, the father pressing a wet towel to the door crack, the mother clutching both kids, faces etched with terror. He took the smaller child into his arms, the smallness a painful reminder of how many children he'd carried to safety. Marco lifted the other. The parents followed, their hands laced even in hell. The descent was slow and precise, every step weighed against the fire's advance. A beam gave way, blocking the main path. Panic flashed, trapped. Then he remembered, a service passage he'd seen on the building plans years ago. Guiding them through secondary corridors, his memory proved steadier than any device. Each turn, each door, each stair felt familiar, as if he had walked it many times. Maybe, in dreams, he had. When they finally burst into open air, the sunlight felt blinding. The family folded into a collective embrace, tears washing soot from their faces. The professionals gathered around them, respect in their eyes, the kind only those who know the danger can show. Marco glanced at him, eyes saying what words couldn't. Anna came close, her smile a ray of sun in the wreckage. And him? He sat on a curb, hands steady, breath even, heart at peace. The fire burned for hours more before surrendering. Other lives were saved, other stories preserved. But for him, that moment, the family safe, his team intact, the mission met. was the crescendo not just of the operation, but of years of searching for meaning. Back at the warehouse, while others celebrated, he stood a moment before the wall. The chalk did not tremble as he drew the 250-second mark. Each line was now not only a life saved, but a chapter of his own redemption, proof that some battles are won not by erasing fear but by facing it again and again. The final fire wasn't about closing a chapter, but about understanding that some chapters never truly end. They evolve into new forms, new meanings, new possibilities. In that evolution, he found not the ending he'd feared, but the beginning he never knew he was seeking. Summer arrived, bringing not just heat but a different light bathing the warehouse in gold. The 252 marks seemed to dance, each one telling not only a rescue but a chapter of personal and collective transformation. He watched that quiet dance with a serenity born not of conclusion, but of understanding. Marco had become not only the operational lead but the team's heartbeat. His practical strength, paired with growing sensitivity, created a space where new volunteers flourished. Anna's organization turned the warehouse from functional hub into a true community center where emergency readiness walked hand in hand with mutual care. He now held a place both central and peripheral, present in every major decision, while letting others shine. His days filled not with urgent operations but with deep conversations, not with danger's rush but with the satisfaction of watching his legacy grow organically. On a clear July morning, while reviewing procedures with a group of medical students who joined as volunteers, something extraordinary happened. A small crowd gathered outside. People of all ages, all backgrounds, each carrying a story tied somehow to the 252 marks. They were families of those rescued, neighbors who'd witnessed operations, community members whose lives had been touched directly or indirectly by the team's work. They brought more than thanks. They brought recognition that the warehouse had become more than a rescue base. It had become a symbol of hope in a city that sometimes forgot how to hope. Marco looked at him, eyes saying what words could not. Anna organized the crowd with a gentleness that turned potential chaos into a graceful celebration. And him? He stood a little apart, watching the fruit of years of sacrifice blossom in ways he'd never imagined. One by one, people shared their stories. The man whose business was saved not only from flames, but from the bankruptcy that would have followed. The woman who found not just shelter in a desperate hour, but a new family among the volunteers. Children who'd learned that heroes don't wear capes, they wear flame-resistant coveralls and carry not superpowers, but ordinary courage turned extraordinary by action. Each story was a thread in the fabric he'd helped weave. Each life touched a confirmation that purpose lives not in grand gestures, but in small acts of courage repeated day after day, year after year. The ache in his joints was no longer a reminder of cost, but a testament to the value received in return. When the last person finished, a reverent quiet settled. Marco stepped forward, holding a simple wooden plaque, carefully carved. To the man who taught us that saving lives isn't about being a hero, but about being human, the inscription read. The words echoed through a space that had seen so much despair and hope. He accepted the plaque not as a prize, but as a symbol of something far larger than any one person, the proof that when people unite around a common purpose, they can create everyday miracles that transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. That night, after everyone had gone and the warehouse returned to its usual silence, he remained as he had so many times before. But the silence was different now, not loneliness, but fullness. Not unanswered questions, but understanding finally reached. His eyes swept the 252 marks, each one glowing softly. They were no longer numbers, they were witnesses, keepers of memory, emblems of transformation. The photo at the center seemed to smile with approval that crossed time and distance. He picked up the chalk one last time, not out of duty, but celebration. The 253rd mark slid firm and smooth, completing not a tally, but a cycle. Not an ending, an opening, a passing of the torch, a confirmation that once lit, some flames never truly go out. Seated at his desk for the last time as the warehouse's chief keeper, he caught his reflection in the window, not the broken man who had arrived years ago, but someone who had discovered that being broken isn't the opposite of being whole, just a different kind of wholeness. A wholeness born not of perfection, but acceptance, not of pain's absence, but its transformation into compassion. The legacy he left wasn't in the marks, the neatly stored gear, or the documented procedures. It lived in Marco's eyes when he led with confidence, in Anna's smile when she calmed someone in panic, in the hands of new volunteers learning to save lives. It lived in a community that had learned to care for one another, in hope that would pass from generation to generation. When he walked out that night, he didn't look back in longing, but in gratitude. Gratitude for every life saved, every lesson learned, every dark moment that taught him to treasure the light. Gratitude for discovering that true redemption doesn't erase the past, it honors it with a meaningful present. Outside, the city kept its eternal dance, stars shone as they always had, and life followed its unpredictable course. And he, the man who once thought he'd lost everything, walked toward a future he no longer feared, knowing that no matter what came, there would always be people willing to say yes when others said no, to run toward danger when others fled, to carry torches of hope through the darkest nights. The legacy wasn't his alone. It belonged to everyone who chose to believe that even a single life can make a difference, that even the most trembling hands can hold others firm, that even the most broken heart can learn to beat again, not just for itself, but for others. In that final understanding, he found not the end of his journey, but the beginning of a new way to exist, not as the man who saves lives, but as part of something infinitely larger, the unbroken chain of humanity that, even in the bleakest circumstances, never stops trying, never stops caring, never stops hoping.